Go, Tara.
Good morning. Welcome to another Atlas webinar. Today, we are focusing on Atlas Middle East and Expo 2020, local and national perspectives. And we welcome everyone who will be joining us today, both our speakers and our audience. I am Tara Duncan. I am a professor in tourism studies at Dalarna University in Sweden, and I am the chair of Atlas, the Association for Tourism and Leisure Education and Research. Atlas is a global organization. We have been around for 30 years this year. Last year we're celebrating 30 years. We have chapters in the Middle East, in Oceania, in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa, and in Europe. We hold regular webinars and conferences in our different chapters, and we also have a number of special interest groups focusing on things such as climate change, cultural heritage, education, dark tourism, business tourism, and many others. So if you are interested, please do and go and have a look at our website. But without further ado, I would like to welcome today's first speakers, and I think Filaretti, you're staying in the background, so I think I'm actually going to introduce our student presentations who have been involved in the Expo throughout. It's just finishing up now, and they're going to talk a little bit about their experiences and show a video that they have produced. So Latifa and Latifa, can I ask you to come online and we can look forward to your presentation? Welcome. I will hand over to you, so I will now mute myself.
Hello all and welcome. My name is Latifa Abdullah. Today me and my colleague Latifa Mubarak will present about our project about Expo 2020. First of all, we are happy to be part of Atlas Web Panel today, and it's an honor for us to work with you and to know the group. Working with Expo 2020, the idea came up when my colleague Latifa Mubarak suggested that we work with them because she's volunteered there. So me, my colleagues, and Dr. Filaretti liked her idea. We started working with Expo and working with people agency team. It was an honor for us to be part of Expo 2020, especially it's one in a lifetime. So we learned a lot of new things. We gained more experience in tourism and events as well. Now my colleague Latifa Mubarak will continue with us.
Thank you, Latifa Abdullah. As you mentioned that we worked with the UAE Pavilion at Expo 2020 Dubai to do our senior project, which was to collaborate with an industry partner through a project to apply our skills and knowledge. We worked with the pavilion through shadowing, entertainment and experience, production management, stage and entertainment, and operations. We had better insight into how different teams work together to deliver a successful experience to the pavilion visitors. You will watch in the video the activation and the entertainment that happened in the pavilion, rooted from the heritage of the UAE and the pavilion oasis experience, like falconry, traditional dance, and craft. Let us now watch the video to discover the traditions and heritage of the UAE. Thank you.
Of the Expo 2020 volunteers. Now, Come with me on our journey with the UAE Pavilion to know and explain what we did there. This was the first time we visited the UAE. Hello everyone and welcome to our senior project. We are a group of 5 students majoring in tourism and cultural communication at Zayed University. We worked on our senior project with Dr. Filarity Qudsi and People Agency team at the UAE Pavilion in Expo 2020. The story of working with the UAE Pavilion started when our colleague Altifa Mbarak shared her idea of collaborating with them because she's one of the Expo 2020 volunteers. Now, come with me on our journey with the UAE Pavilion to know and explain what we did there. This was the first time we visited the UAE Pavilion with our professor, and the purpose of that visit was to meet Her Excellency Noura bint Mohammed Al-Ka'bi. We explained to her our project and what we will do. She supported us and was happy to have us there. Then we had a tour in the pavilion with a tour guide named Sheila. After that, we went to the People Agency office. We met the group who were working there and what is the role of each one in the coming period. On this day, we had a meeting with Mr. Hassan Anani and 2 more from the People Agency team. We discussed what we are going to do in the next visits to the site, and he suggested to do a video workshop with PJ, the photographer of the pavilion. In this visit, we explored the activation which were around the pavilion, and Mr. Hassan was explaining for us everything in details. The activation are from culture and traditions of the UAE, such as doing telly. This handicraft produces fabulous textiles, which are used to decorate the traditional women's clothing. It is a craft that has been passed down by women generation after generation. The Sado craft is one of the traditional crafts that Emirati women have worked in since ancient times to meet the necessary needs for the desert people and to provide the raw materials needed for this craft, primarily camel hair. Also, falconry is from our traditions and heritage. Mr. Muhammad Al-Hamadi explained for us kinds of falcons and the name of each type. Falconry is a traditional activity involving hunting with trained falcons. On the other side, there were women making burqa. The burqa is a detail of Emirati woman's life and an element of her formal dress. The burqa is one of the oldest accessories. Today, it is worn by older women, and here they are representing the tradition gold of the woman in the UAE. Finally, we saw the Ayala show. The art of Al-Ayala embodies the values and heritage of the United Arab Emirates, and it's performed by a group of men carrying sticks, performing harmony dance to the rhythm of drums. On this day, we did a Zoom meeting with the photographer PJ at the Youth Hub at Emirates Towers. We learned how to shoot videos and edit them. Also, he gave us some tips for photos and videos as well. In this day, we were in the back office of the pavilion with Louisa. She's responsible for the stage and entertainment. She introduced the group members and the role of each one for us. Also, how they are managing a big event and shifting the time between each other. Then we went where the activation, and she told us about it. After that, we met the stage manager, Anthony, and he explained about the management of performance. Here, where is the section of Arabic coffee, and it's called Male Majlis. Serving coffee is one of the most important traditions of hospitality in the Arab community in general and the Emirati community in particular. Arabic coffee has been an essential part of Arab culture for several centuries. The way it's prepared and served is characterized by delicate traditions and rituals. Then we moved to the Women Majlis, where visitors can sit and talk with the women working there. We really enjoyed our time while talking with them. They explained for us their job and taught us about the process of making handicrafts. You can see here the giveaways for the pavilion visitors, which was a bracelet made from telly and saddle. And here we were chatting with Louisa about the show and who's responsible about this. In the last visit to the pavilion, we met Leon, the site manager. He explained for us his role and what he is responsible for in the pavilion. And he said, safety is number one. The atmosphere of the pavilion was great. There was a music, and you can hear the voice of the falcons by a sound effect because the design of the pavilion inspired from the falcon wings. Also, the village is found there. It is a water system were used in the past to irrigate the agriculture. At the end, we would like to thank everyone who was part of doing our senior project, and a special thanks to Her Excellency Noura bint Mohammed Al-Kaabi, People Agency team, and Mr. Hassan Al-Anani. It is an honor for us to be part of the team and work with the UAE Pavilion. Thank you all for watching. We hope you enjoy it and like our video.
Thank you, Latifa and Latifa. Thank you for your amazing work and for working for 4 months at the UAE Pavilion. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm very happy that you're among us, and I would like to present myself. I'm the graduate coordinator of Zagreb University at the College of Communication and Media Sciences, and I'm also a professor, and I teach these wonderful students. And I'm also the coordinator of the Atlas Middle East, and this is our first webinar, and we're hoping to have more webinars and other conferences related to the region here. I would like to introduce now our second speaker, who is Dr. William Mccarthy, and he is also working at Zagreb University at the same college as me. And he's an assistant professor, and his work today is on Expo 2020. And he has visited the 192 pavilions, as far as I know, and tried to, to showcase the different semiotics and structures related to Expo 2020 this year. And his research in general examines semiotics and branding and experiential media. So, William, we're happy to hear your presentation now. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. I'm just going to share the screen for my PowerPoint. Okay. Yeah, so as Phil already introduced, I visited all 192 country pavilions, which was really interesting. And my goal in that was to examine the semiotics, examine what was being emphasized or perhaps not being emphasized in different pavilions. And some of that I would term past, present, future orientation, but also looking beyond that to see other codes. So let me just get into it because the time's going to go by fast and I won't be able to cover everything. And first, just take a look at the methodology in brief of what I did. Between January and March 2022, I visited and I coded all 192 country pavilions at the Expo. So coding, just doing like a content analysis, but also looking at semiotics, also looking at narrative, all those different kind of angles, and just going to all the pavilions, having my notebook and just writing down all the notes. And I tried to read every panel that was in every pavilion. I might have missed a couple of things, but I did the best I could to go through it. I think if I did this again, I would have started earlier and I would have tried to do the entire coding 2 times. I think would have been better. And there's a number of pavilions I have gone to twice, but I would like to take my codes and go a second time, but I don't think I'll have enough time until this all ends, of course, in just a couple of weeks. But maybe the next Expo in Osaka, I'll do that. So the coding process was meant to be inductive. What that means is I collected the codes without really having in my mind some predetermined codes I was going to use. I didn't look at past studies to see if there were code books. I don't know if those exist or not, because I'm using a grounded theory approach where I didn't do an extensive literature review before going into the field. I've done research on World's Fairs, but that goes back to the 19th century and other parts of my research, but I'm not really up on what's happened in World Fairs since, say, 1964, 1965, the one in New York for which Disney was involved in. So I'm using grounded theory, doing an inductive approach, doing all this coding. I'm still in the process of doing my axial and selective coding. That's going to take a while to go through before I can really start to do cross-variable analysis and everything else. So what we're seeing today is essentially preliminary findings and what I would call also some future directions of where this research could go and what might be interesting to look at for future expos. So my main coding was looking at past, present, and future orientations. That was kind of what I was looking at in the beginning. And then putting the countries, trying to figure out what they were emphasizing. So this is what I was looking at, that the country pavilions were coded for signifiers of past, present, and future orientation. What indicators was I looking for? Well, past indicators would concern history and heritage. So things like they would have posters that would talk about the history of the country. They would have artifacts from the country. They would have, we just saw in the video, the UAE Pavilion where they were doing handicrafts, things like that. That would be indicators of history and heritage. Then present, all pavilions had something about these present indicators, and this would concern life and culture, technology today technology. So if they talked about, say, an app that had been developed in the country, well, that's the present indicator because that's something that's already happening today in the country. Business investment opportunities. Almost every pavilion had at least some poster that would talk about business investment opportunities. Some emphasized it more than others. Some would ask you if you wanted to give your email address and say what you were interested in. For example, the Zimbabwe pavilion at the end had a bunch of interactive screens where you could indicate what type of investment you were interested in to do in the country, and they would contact you later. So that was much more of a forward-thinking type of presentation, and other countries would just have maybe a poster that would maybe have an email address that you could contact later. And all types of like background information where they would give you the population of the country, they would give you the map, of the country, the map where it's located in relation to the world, what are the languages that are spoken, all that type of information would be about a present indicator. Then future indicators were things that were concerning upcoming technology, things that were not yet invented, but maybe in the process of being invented, or talking about innovation for things like smart cities, things like green energy, things like space exploration was a big one, quite a few. Future transportation networks, digital connectivity of the future, not of the internet we have today, but where it might go for the future. So those were the indicators that I was looking at. And then taking all of that and then doing the coding, I pretty much narrowed it down to kind of 3 categories that every country would fit into to some extent of this orientation. The first category I would say is predominantly past and present orientation. Second would be past, present, and future, would have all 3. And I saw 2 different ways that that was being done. One I would call a detached method, which was the past, present, and future was literally being separated by rooms, where you'd go in a room and it would talk about the history of the country. Then another room would have, what's happening now. And then a third room would say, where this country sees itself going in the future. And then the other one is what I call intermingled, where they really kind of combined all 3 of them together. A good example of that would be the Egypt pavilion, where you have this one room, which is like this matrix digital rain room, where it's raining hieroglyphics rather than in the Matrix film where it's raining Japanese katakana characters. But right behind that matrix room, there's a display with a ancient sarcophagus at the same time. So it's this interesting kind of intermingling where the presentation of the rooms themselves were very much kind of rounded edges, was kind of futuristic look to it. But at the same time, they were also putting in this kind of heritage and past and these artifacts of the past to go with the future, to go with the present, all intermingled. So most countries did the detached method, was kind of room by room. I think Indonesia would be a good example of that, where very nice pavilion and would take you through the past, the history of the country, where it is today, and then where it sees itself going in the future. And then the third category, which is the one that was not, it was not the most common one, but it was one about 21 countries, we'll see in a minute, that use this, which is predominantly present and future, and did not look to the past or heritage at all. So there was no history of the country. There was no kind of context for that. It just kind of took you into the present, and oftentimes was really pretty much focused on the future instead. Or if there was something from the past, it was just like one thing. So for example, the China pavilion, there was one, when you walk into the pavilion on the left side, most people don't even see it because they're probably just walking right into the next room where there is like this 3D space presentation. But on the left side, there is a Song Dynasty, which is about 1000 AD landscape painting. But other than that, there really isn't anything about Chinese history and heritage. And another thing I noticed is in the presentations for the countries that were predominantly present in future is that they were either had few or no people, or they had people in it. And in a way that kind of makes sense, because if you're talking about the future, we don't know how people are going to look in the future. And the focus is on the technology, not so much on the people in those cases. So a good example of that would be the Norway Pavilion, which is shaped like a tanker, like a big ship. And when you walk into it, it's like you're walking into the hold of the ship. And then you sit down, and there is a presentation on the screens on the side and a bigger screen up in the front. And it talks all about this really interesting technology for sustainability, for sustainable fishing, for energy, but there's no people in any of the presentations. It's all about the technology and the machinery. So I thought that was kind of interesting how some countries were looking at like that. Or if they had people, they were just these kind of very vague, ambiguous, animated people that, didn't even have like facial features. They were just kind of, put in there as crowds within a smart city type of animation. So looking at the breakdown of how this goes, and again, I need to kind of go back to the codes. There's some that I might change from one to the other, and I'm going to go back the next couple of weeks. There's a few that I think are maybe borderline, but for the predominantly past and present, got about 110 country pavilions, and you can see the breakdown geographically for that. For Europe, the westernmost country that did not have any type of future orientation, or had very, very small future orientation, in which case I said it's predominantly past and present, would be Malta. And then for the past, present, and future, I put 61 country pavilions. For Europe, it's 2-to-1. The 18 2-to-1 is Western Europe, and you can see here the detached to the intermingled. Detached was the predominant form of this type of orientation. Intermingled, I think, is a little bit more difficult to kind of put together, but the countries that did it, I think, did it in a very interesting manner to have those together. And I would pick up some codes that I just thought were interesting on the way. Sometimes they were unique. For example, El Salvador and Bitcoin as a part of their present and future orientation. El Salvador was the only country that mentioned Bitcoin in their pavilion. And this is very recent in El Salvador, just in the past year with the new administration, has come in and opened Bitcoin accounts for all their citizens. And I just found it fascinating that this Bitcoin, it's been around since 2009. It's a decentralized digital currency, yet you have a country that is making it a part of its identity, separating it from other countries, saying that, we're going to be a Bitcoin country. And you can start to see, it wasn't in the pavilions, but in the news, some of the Caribbean islands like St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Lucia are also kind of getting on board with this. And this is what I mean by future directions. I think it'll be interesting to look at future expos, 2025 in Osaka, or 2030, maybe in Saudi Arabia, and see if that becomes something that more countries start to talk about, or maybe not. Just kind of wondering about those types of things as I'm coding. And then predominantly present in future, 21 country pavilions, mostly in Europe, and 13 of the 21 had very few or no people in the displays. And again, it kind of makes sense because it's future oriented, and we don't have pictures of people in the future, because obviously the future hasn't happened yet. But we can have lots of photographs of people in the present or people in the past. So it makes sense, but at the same time, it just made me kind of wonder about it too. To give you an example of it, I think Estonia was an interesting example of this. They literally labeled their pavilion E-Estonia, almost like renaming the country. I think it's the only country that did that literally added something to their official name of the country. And their pavilion was all intangible. And that was another characteristic of the future-oriented pavilions, is there's nothing really to touch because it hasn't been invented yet, right? You can't touch something. Nothing can be tangible if it's in the future. Future hasn't happened. But what was interesting to me in the Estonia one is that they had these digital screens, which were very nice presentations about how their economy, their government, everything is digital. One of the screens talked about you can do everything digital in Estonia except get married and get divorced. You still have to do those two things in person. And also inside the pavilion, to make it, I guess, look more futuristic, they had these kind of blue light orbs that were floating. And again, that intangibility aspect was interesting to me because that was the only tangible thing in the pavilion until you got to the restaurant. Of course, that's tangible. But they had a sign in front of them saying, don't touch, don't touch these blue light orbs, because I imagine some people probably knocked into them and maybe broke a few. So there really isn't anything that you can touch. You can only look at the screens and see this kind of future orientations. Just a couple more things. I know I'm going to run out of time on this. There's a lot to talk about. Sustainability was a key word that was used throughout almost all the pavilions. I counted only 20 pavilions that I saw that did not contain that word in some form. And again, there were 3 zones: sustainability, opportunity, mobility. Didn't matter. That word was used everywhere. It didn't matter if you're in sustainability pavilion or not. And even in those 20, it could be it was there and I just missed it on one of the panels. So that is the key word, I think, for this expo. And I'd be interested to see in 2025, 2030, if maybe there's going to be different keywords. Last thing I'll take a look at, there's a lot more to talk about, but diversity and globalism was interesting with this, and seeing the word diversity being used or other words that are like diversity, but other countries would use different vocabulary. So the vocabulary I saw in 57 country pavilions that touched on this implicitly or explicitly was ethnic diversity, cultural diversity, multicultural, melting pot, multi-ethnic, multiple religions, ethnic groups, people groups, multiracial, number of tribes, number of languages, and more and more and more. So it was just interesting to see how different countries, depending on their context, depending on their history and their present, have different ways to express what we would call what is termed diversity. And there were 4 country pavilions that mentioned the contributions of expatriates. Luxembourg and Monaco went out of the way to specify how many people from other countries live there. The UAE had, before you watch the movie at the end, they had these photograph vignettes of families from the UK, from the Philippines, from South Asia, who've made the UAE their home. And Thailand, in their 3 showrooms, they had, I was surprised, it's very interesting, their last showroom was all about expats who have made Thailand their home. And I know the Thai government is kind of going into this a bit more as kind of a digital nomad type of location. And they actually had a YouTuber, Mark Wiens, if you know who he is, he's a famous YouTube food vlogger, has over 8.5 million subs on YouTube. And he was a part of it as well as professors, lawyers, doctors, business people, athletes, who've all made Thailand their home. And that was the pavilion that really accentuated that the most. 2 country pavilions honored their diaspora, the people they sent around the world, Ireland and the Philippines. The Philippines at the top of the pavilion has a sculpture and structure that shows these birds traveling around the world, representing all the Filipinos who have left their homeland for a while to work and support their families back home. And it was quite touching. And then there were 4 countries that talked about their Citizen by Investment program. Again, all in the Caribbean. There are other countries that do this, but only these Caribbean countries mentioned it. So I know I'm going over time, so I'll stop here. But just to say that I just found it all really interesting going through and just coding all these different country pavilions, seeing what they emphasized and what the differences were within regions, within continents, within neighboring countries. There's a lot of data to go through, and it's going to take me quite a while to go through it, but I'm hoping to go to Osaka in 2025 and do this again and start making comparisons.
Thank you, Will, for this very interesting presentation. And yeah, I mean, you must have spent a lot of time waiting at the queues. I went to a few pavilions, but I am amazed by the time that people spend to wait to get into the pavilion. So I'm sure you spend a lot of time doing that. Thank you very much. We'll take the questions from the people after we finish with all the presenters. Now I would like to present Dora Farmaki. She's the advisor to the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Hellenic Diaspora and Public Diplomacy in Greece. She visited the Expo 2020 and she actually brought an event to this Expo this year. And her talk today is multi-level dialogue of cultures and how the national narrative becomes universal. So Dora, please talk to us about this amazing event that you brought to Expo 2020 this year from Greece. I think you're muted.
I have to unmute. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you via Zoom. My sincere thanks to Atlas and the organizing team of this interesting webinar and everyone attending the event. Being able to tell a story under different circumstances, I'll analyze its texture and expand its scope, further explain it and presenting different angles of the story, and also address different audiences, making it more impactful is not always a given. So therefore, as the event curator, I'm grateful for this opportunity you gave me here. And I wanted to say that I really enjoyed the presentation of Dr. William Mccarthy just before mine, for all of you to be aware of this semiotic analysis of the Expo pavilions that helps identify the meanings, signs, and their interactions. Also define the contextual settings of the event I'm going to present here as probably a case study. So I wouldn't be able to explain it in such a detailed manner. Quite recently, on February 24th, the event, A Universal Narrative of Light from Apollo's birthplace Dilus to a Brighter Future, has taken place at the Expo. I will now share my presentation. With you. I hope you can see the screen. Yes. So the event was titled A Universal Narrative of Light from Apollo's birthplace Dilus to a Brighter Future. It's live streamed, so you can have a look at the YouTube video when the session has finished, or at your earlier convenience to find out more about this event. It was co-organized by the Hellenic Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the municipality of Mykonos, and supported by the enterprise who's in charge of the Greek pavilion at Expo. The ultimate goal of the event was to use the timeless symbolisms of Delos Island to highlight the modern identity of our country at the crossroads of science and art, through a storytelling process aiming to weave a universal narrative. I guess most of you don't know Delos, but you might clearly recognize Mykonos, the island next to Delos, a global brand name in World Tourism Destinations map. However, in antiquity, from 4th century before Christ to the 1st century after Christ, the journey of Dilus was fascinating. It has been a cosmopolitan, independent, and prosperous port with over 30,000 inhabitants in ancient Greece. It has also been the birthplace of Apollo, the god of light, according to Greek mythology. So the two elements, the multicultural way this place was inhabited, and the fact that a god of light and harmony, Apollo, was born there, was the basis for our narrative. Also, during the Roman times, it turned into a toll-free island and became a world-famous trade hub where different cultures coexisted, as in modern Dubai. Wealthy merchants, bankers, and ship owners from the Mediterranean basin and Middle East, Egypt, Syria, Tunisia, settled on the island, where they built lavish houses decorated with murals, mosaic floors, and statues, adding to the island's fame and splendor. Creativity, commerce, and economy flourished, expressing values of tolerance, endurance, and inclusivity. The opportunity to narrate a story, this story in Dubai, a contemporary city with so many analogies and similarities to Dilus of the past, sounded so crucial and timely, as if we had the ideal platform to explain a collective multicultural past, shaping spatial and temporal memory and loading it with meaning. At World Expo 2020, the debate on dialogue of cultures and peoples has gained a new momentum based on the pavilion's activities, the orientation of Expo theme, and the format of the districts. The structural elements of this narrative, apart from the place itself and the analogies that we wanted to concentrate on Dilus and Dubai, are the following. First of all, it's the light. The light, it's central. It's a symbolic light. It's not only the physical essence of light or the waves it takes form of. So it's also the myth that it carries. Dilus is a symbolic island of light where Apollo was born. So this powerful myth and its relation to the symbolism of light and Apollo also as the god of light for the future and space exploration. NASA moon missions have been named Apollo many years ago, has been a very catalytic element of our narrative. Also the fact that the event's purpose was to symbolize through the light and bring up the hope for a better tomorrow. Light epitomizes all tangible and intangible aspects of the multi-level dialogue of cultures that World Expo aims to explore, expand, and accelerate. So this was a very, very important element and asset that we had to underline. More than that, we wanted to be based on light because it is the means, the medium that connects us from the past to the future. As the previous presentation has demonstrated, there was always a need for a connection or intermingling, as you said, between the past and the future, usually through a metamorphosis, a transformation process. So this light, this symbol gave us the basic thread to go through this metamorphosis process. More than that, light is intrinsically linked with the ancient Greek culture. And here is a dialogue that Dr. Yannis Ioannidis, one of the speakers, distinguished speakers that we had, presented in his presentation at the first session of the event, which was related to the shaping of a new narrative for light. The second pillar we wanted to emphasize was sorry, I have jumped to the next slide, was to emphasize today, and from today to bring into shape a bridge to the future. The Greek Pavilion's theme is Greece, tomorrow, today, and it aimed at communicating a creative process towards the future based on our present, not on our past. So we had to demonstrate the means of the present time, not only the history narratives. Peter Frankopan was excellent in explaining how important this historic model city has been able to transfer the myth into history. But more than that, we have the opportunity nowadays through digital storytelling to interpret this present and bring more meaning to the future. Another part of the presentation that we had through the awarded, Emmy awarded, and not only Emmy, but recipient of many awards, Eleftheria Deco, lighting designer that also took part in this event, was to discuss the challenges of light and lighting designer in relation to not only the pragmatic acceleration of the visual presentation of monuments or the modern buildings, but also the inner light and the importance of this spiritual part of light. I believe that this perspective was the most catalytic one in creating the bridges to the universal narrative. I will show in the next slide the image of Nujum Al-Ghanem, an Emirati poet, artist, and filmmaker who presented, recited her poem, I found my way to you, that explained the importance of stars in narrating the universal narrative of light, how universal this narrative is. The other pillar of our perspective was the nexus of science and art. It's a universal language. Here you can see Galileo Galilei moon. It's very famous, and he was a pioneer in connecting science and art and identifying processes that would be so influential from one discipline to the other. Science and art also meet in digital storytelling, interactive narrative experiences, which is a new form of art. We shouldn't forget that storytelling combines facts and fiction, so it's also part of this science and art interconnection. Light is both science and art interplay was a very, very good means for us to highlight the positive effects of interdisciplinarity, also in science. We also engaged into narratives that explained the universal and diachronic symbolism of light through the stars, as I explained before, via the poem of Nujum Al-Ghanem, and also the presentation of the Metamorphosis artwork of Effi Spirou that was inspired by Dilus, and it has been brought to the pavilion physically, and it will remain there until the end of the exhibition. I think it's the only, let's say, tangible asset of the Greek pavilion. The other assets of the Greek pavilion are videos, are oriented towards a more future related presentation of the country. So the last, not the last, a very crucial part of the event was the panel discussion that brought up a new narrative, starting from the description of what Dilus represents. Dilus is an island of the past. It's an archaeological site. It's not a living place, but it's a basis for a lot of discussions that explain the way science and art interplays. Analogies with other countries, for example, a representative from Syrian Foundation, Atasi Foundation was there, an urban planner was there to explain the analogies of Dilus structure, the urban design of the city to the modern cities. So this also gave an opportunity for a transformation of this narrative from a national, local scale to a universal scale. I would like to show to you a very important monument of Dilus. It was discovered in the beginning of the 20th century, and it is a marble slab providing 36 wreaths to honor an athlete, an Odoros athlete. And here you can see the analogy with a ring that is actually the inspiration Expo logo, the Sarouk al-Hadid finding. So this analogy also was something very impressive and interesting for us, because it gave us the opportunity to make this kind of comparison and transfer of the audience to the now, to Dubai as it is now, to a multicultural city of the present linked to the multicultural city of the past. Finally, the last part of the session was the one that discussed a project that has a clear orientation to the future. So using the inspiration of Pindar, the lyric poet that is offering an hymn to the place of Dilus, that is a counter, is the opposite to the dark, the light. In the same way, Alpha Mission Dilus was offered as a tool for the building of a brighter future, a new narrative that will connect different initiatives from all over the world to identify ways to fight and interact with projects related to climate change. Mainly the focus is the space exploration projects, but not for the goal of space discovery, but for the goal of bringing back the means and the instruments to save our planet. So we believe that this narrative has been able to generate an interest for building the bridges from the past to the future through the present. And I hope this was obvious to the audience, and I really believe that it's worth taking always the right tools and exploring the right tools to make this bridge obvious for everything we have in front of us, of course, through the light. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dora, for this enlightening presentation. And it was very interesting to see that your presentation and Dr. Will's intermingle, if I may use his,
exactly.
From his analysis. And yes, we hope anything for a brighter future. So I would like to now ask Dr. Greg Richards to present his presentation and, wrap up our webinar. He's a professor of placemaking and events at Breda University in the Netherlands. And his presentation today is entitled Eventful Cities, Events that Shape Cities and Cities that Shape Events.
Okay, thanks very much. I see we're almost at the discussion time, so I will try and be brief.
It's okay.
Let me first see if I can find my presentation. That would be good. So hopefully you can see that. No, there we go. So I hope you can see my screen. Not getting any feedback, so I will continue. Okay, so the title you've heard, and this presentation tries to take a more general view of the relationship between events and places, thinking about how events can make places and in particular cities more eventful. And in the book Eventful Cities, we talk at some length about the ability of events like the Expo to support the long-term policy agendas of cities with the overall aim of enhancing the quality of life for all. So I think this also fits well with the themes of the previous speakers. Just to give you a bit more of a historical overview, Greenhall categorized all the previous expos into 5 types, and one of the things that is fairly clear is that the Expo in Dubai fits very well into the latest category, which is Expos for the Future and Sustainable Development. So I think that's a fairly logical development of the Expo evolution. One of the interesting things from a research point of view is the amount of research being done on expos. If you look in Scopus and you search for World Expos, for example, this is more or less what you get. The interesting thing being that there was a peak of research around the 2010 Expo in Shanghai, China, but since then it's actually declined. So there are clear opportunities to do more research, particularly around recent expos like Dubai, for example. If you analyze these sources in terms of the research themes, then we also see many echoes of what we've heard in the previous presentations. There's a lot of work on place branding, countries trying to project their image through their pavilions and their positioning, the impact of the Expo on tourism, which Dubai has put a lot of emphasis on, and then in recent years also increasing attention for the attitudes of residents, which of course is important in terms of generating visits from the local population. And from the Eventful Cities point of view, the growth in research on architecture and the relationship of expos to urban development is particularly important. I just wanted to give you a quick example of one city that hosted world exhibitions in the past to show you what might possibly happen with Dubai and other more recent expos. Barcelona is a city that projected itself on the world stage through two world exhibitions in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and followed that up with a series of mega events which were designed in particular to increase the city's profile as a cultural city. The interesting thing about this is that you can still see the traces of the World Expos in the fabric of the city. This is a map actually of tourism density. So you can see that most of the tourists tend to concentrate along the Ramblas and Passeig de Gracia in the center of the old city, for example. But you have then Parc Ciutadella, which was the location for the 1888 World Expo, which is still there, visible in the fabric of the city, and Plaza de España, which was the centerpiece of the 1929 World Expo. So these places are still places which are attracting people today and which have shaped the physical layout of the city even 100 or more years later. And Barcelona has used these kind of mega events to really transform itself. If we look back to the 1960s, this was the beach in Barcelona, not exactly a very attractive place for tourists, one would suggest. But the Olympic Games, and very often we see the Olympic Games being combined with expos. Once people have had a go with an Olympic Games or an expo, they try and move on to the next mega event. And so Barcelona has used the 1992 Olympic Games also as a means of transforming the city. So this is the beach now, which clearly is a bit more attractive for tourists. And in recent years, what Barcelona has been doing is highlighting the role of sustainability in terms of the development of the city. This is also something we see reflected in the expos. And so the development of what they call super blocks has been a very important policy thrust in recent years. So there are blocks which are kept traffic free. And these are also, of course, important places where you can stage events in the city. And Barcelona has, through its practice with staging these major events, become really a cradle for creating new events as well. Events like Primavera Sound, Sonar, have become more and more important for the city. And these have become a way of animating different spaces in the city. So Sonar started off in the city centre and has now moved to the pavilions on the edge of the city. Primavera Sound took over the former location for the Universal Forum of Cultures, as you can see from that picture. This is interesting because the Universal Forum of Cultures is one of the big failures of Barcelona in terms of major events. This is something they don't like to talk about in the city. If you go to the Expo site today, this is what you will see. Fairly deserted and not very attractive, particularly in the rain. And you know, this is before the pandemic. So even before the pandemic, there was nobody here. So after the pandemic, there was absolutely nobody there. So you know, expos can be very successful in terms of urban development and in terms of providing places where events can take place and so on. But it doesn't always work. So that's also a warning for cities hosting expos, that you have to get things right if you're going to be successful. Arguably, what you need to do is not just to have the basic physical resources of the expo site, but you also need to inject a high level of creativity in order to give these places meaning. The reason for the failure of the UNESCO event in Barcelona was that the event did not have meaning for people in the city. So that's a very brief run through of my take on the relationship between events and the city. You can find a lot more on my website as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. That was a nice presentation, wrapping up, you know, our event. And also, I was yesterday at Expo, by the way, and it is interesting to see what will happen. I was just, you know, considering what you were just saying, because they will start dismantling all the pavilions. So one wonders what will happen to this huge. I mean, they have plans for sustainable city and other things, but you know, it is very interesting to see how all this will be dismantled and taken away. Anyway, so thank you very much. I would like now to ask all the presenters to turn on their cameras, and if we have any comments from the audience, maybe Tara can let us know about the feedback of the audience or any other questions.
Thank you. Positive feedback on the presentation so far. Because we're a little bit delayed on YouTube, I'm just hoping that some questions will come through. Maybe I can start with a quick question for Will, if that would be all right. Just you sort of mentioned what next. So what are you? I know you were thinking about the next Expo, but with the data that you've gathered from this one, what are your plans to use it for? Or
yeah, I guess I need to go through it a lot more, but hopefully a journal article to come out of this. I need to do the extensive literature review as well to see what's been done before, and you know where my data can add to what people have done before. I'm using grounded theory also, so I'm trying to see if there's some overarching theory that can come out of this or not. So hopefully, you know, a journal article, and then of course, future directions, you know, for the next expos, and also comparison with the previous ones.
Thank you. I'm still waiting for questions, so I'm not sure if any of the other speakers had any questions or anything.
Dora, you're muted. I think you're trying to ask a question. We can't hear you. We still can't hear you. Yeah.
Now you can hear me.
Yes,
perfect.
we
can. I was wondering whether this kind of light interaction has been observed as a medium of bringing past and future together, or present and future together, was observed in some other pavilions. Did you notice some of the existing pavilions having the similar way to create this kind of narrative towards a brighter future? Because, for example, the French pavilion has as a theme light speed inspiration, if I remember well. But when I visited it, the focus was mostly to the future, to space exploration, and also the galaxy journeys through the literature, for example, from you know, the story of Saint-Exupéry, the Little Prince. So I don't know if there is some kind of narrative evident in other pavilions that you would like to discuss, or you have observed or will through your semiotic analysis?
I think Greg has his hand up, so I'll let him go.
Uh-oh, I wasn't ready for that. But no, I just wanted to make the point that light events are an increasing area of research. More and more cities are staging light festivals, and light, of course, has this connotation of rebirth and all that kind of stuff. One of my colleagues, Marco Bavolo, is an expert in light festivals, and he worked for Philips. Mm-hmm. And of course, Philips wanted to use light festivals as a way of saying this is future technology, this is a new beginning, and all this kind of stuff. So he might have some interesting ideas on this relationship as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. The thing is that it's not only technology, and the way we would like to tackle this cross, the path from the past to the future through light is not only through technology. So is it part of some, let's say, spiritual lessons of some of the pavilions, for example, those related to the East Asia countries? I wonder. I didn't have the opportunity to visit a lot of pavilions, only a few through the few days I was there. So I haven't had the opportunity to.
Yeah, I think, well, Singapore, I would say, is one that wasn't really concentrating on like machine type technology or computer technology, but it was the Green Pavilion. It was just all about green cities and how that is going to create a better environment, not just for climate change, but for human beings to live in. So they had I think, a more humanistic approach by using literally green plants. I mean, the whole pavilion was just covered in just plants and natural life. And so that was quite different as a future orientation than some of the other ones, which were more about, like I said, it's technological aspects.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Still no questions in the chat, I'm afraid, but I do have another one, perhaps for all three speakers. Oh no, we do have a question now. It's for Will. As your methodology, this is from Naomi, and apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly, Naomi Mosweta. As your methodology, did you have any order of sampling, or did you just approach pavilions in any order, or how can you maybe explain that a little bit, please?
Yeah, that's a good question. My strategy was just to visit them as the queues were available. I was able to get, because I had to make really liberal use of like their quick queue technology in order to get to the front of the line, because some of them are just 2-hour waits, and I just wouldn't be able to go through all of them. So I did try to do them in order, as far as I did all of mobility first, just because I ended up parking in there most of the time. And then I moved over to sustainability, and then I did opportunity last, though there was some intermixing. However, the locations weren't really, even though it was an opportunity, they would still talk about sustainability. And while certainly some big pavilions like Norway, for example, within sustainability was all about sustainability, there would be ones that would be an opportunity that would still talk about it. So it wasn't always clear cut that the land, so to speak, that the country pavilion was in was going to be all in on that. So if you go to the Croatia pavilion in mobility, they have Rimac, the fastest car in the world, but they also have all about inventors, this kind of video presentation. They have kind of tourism and beautiful sites, of course, you can go to Croatia to see. So there's always this kind of mix that's there. But as far as the sampling, it's just kind of hard to I mean, I guess I could have tried to organize it by continent or region, but the wear and tear on my feet as well, if I tried that, it's huge. It's like the size of it compared to a theme park, say like Disneyland, it's about 6 Disneylands to go through. So if I had tried that strategy of doing all of Oceania, I'd be, you know, I would have worn out my sneakers and yeah. So I don't know if that, you know, I guess that comparison could have been interesting to see them all at the same time. But you know, you know, it's never perfect, but I try to keep in mind, you know, what I saw at the Seychelles, when I went to the Maldives, when I went to the Marshall Islands, when I went to Micronesia, you know, I would check all my notes I would have and, you know, try to remember like that.
Thank you. Really interesting, and just to think about your logistics, let alone how to put it together. Greg, we have a question for you. Is Barcelona adopting a participatory approach to develop big events? Which stakeholders are included in the project envisioning? And is there a similar approach to smart projects? And that's from Stefania Escobar.
Well, I wouldn't say that Barcelona or in fact any other city is developing a participatory approach to big events, because big events you usually have to compete for in an international arena, and it's about politics and lobbying. And if you bring the citizens in, it's kind of like, oh, look, we also have some people who live here. So I think, you know, it's unlikely that major events will have much participation other than, you know, maybe organizing things for, you know, the Olympic Committee or the Expo Committee to show them what a wonderful population you have. But beyond that, in terms of the policy, the policies are usually, you know, the realm of policymakers, and tend to be very much economics driven anyway, because getting these things costs a lot of money.
And what about sort of smart projects? Or, I mean, do you see this on a smaller scale? You know, if it's not big projects, do you see more?
Yeah,
more
on a smaller scale, you do have some cities which make more efforts to involve people in these kind of decisions. But by and large, the event portfolios of cities are not constructed by citizens. They are constructed for them largely by policymakers. So the involvement tends to be when people come along to attend the event. That's where most of the involvement takes place. Of course, it may be different when we get a growth in more digital events, for example, but we still haven't seen what the effect of that might be.
Thank you. Dora, did you?
Yes, that makes me wonder, maybe in the case of Expo 2020, the theme is connecting minds, it's addressing to people, yes, creating the future. So which minds? The minds of people that also visit the Expo, and how are they able to get connected to create the future, because the visitors don't have the opportunity to interact, to be able to discuss about the future. They are viewers, no? They are they have the interaction with each pavilion, but not with a interconnected platform where they will be able to interact between different pavilions and discuss about the future. So I wonder how this vision could be implemented if in the prior steps of the implementation, people were involved in a more strategic way. Greg.
Yeah, I think the one of the interesting things about the Barcelona Forum is that they actually had a model for involving people. And what they did was they set up a series of dialogues and debates. So it was a UNESCO event. It was related particularly to sustainability and cultural diversity. So the same kind of things that are common in the Expo as well. And so people could come along and participate in these debates. It didn't work perhaps as well as they would have liked, because ordinary citizens of Barcelona did not come along. But this is the same problem that you have with cultural events as well. You can put on lots of things, but you can't necessarily encourage people to attend, not in the way that you would like. So there are models for creating debate and exchanging ideas, but it's still not perfect.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully we will be able to be implemented in the future expos.
Unfortunately, still no questions, but I do have one more, if that's all right, to keep adding questions. And I was just been thinking about the last few years with the COVID pandemic. Sort of this move to lots of online, the things that Will was talking about with sustainability. So, when we're thinking about future events like Expo, what does that mean for future expos? And maybe actually all three speakers could reflect on that.
One slide I didn't get to, I thought was interesting, was looking at how many pavilions actually talked about COVID at all, whether they even mentioned it. And it was very rare. Only, if I just look at my notes quickly here, only Kazakhstan had actually a display of the vaccine that had been created there. One of the island nations, I forgot which one, talked about the cleaning, the hygiene that was going into the care for the tourism places. But most of them didn't. There was very little, not just on COVID, but only about 8 pavilions talked about the pharmaceutical industry, and no one talked about cancer, no one talked about HIV, no one talked about Alzheimer's, diabetes. There's nothing. And my curiosity is looking back on past expos. Maybe that's just a thing, that health and disease and that area just isn't covered on expos. But that just would seem to me. But Greg probably would know more than I would about this.
I don't know about that, but it seems to me that there's now an interesting question about events of this scale. Expos are absolutely enormous events which attract millions of people. After our experience in the pandemic, we might think twice about whether that's a good idea. And it's not just related to expos, of course. I mean, you also had earlier outbreaks of SARS related to Mecca, for example. So any kind of big gathering carries a growing risk of spreading disease. And that's something that expo organizers will certainly want to think about. But also it might be a driver to developing, smaller expo models, more niche expos, which are not designed necessarily to attract millions, but which do the same thing within a particular field, for example.
One thing to add on to that was interesting that I noticed was there was a difference between pavilions that had touch screens and would always have the disinfectant next to it. And some of the pavilions have the hover interactive screens where you don't touch the screen at all. You just put your hand over it and you maneuver in the screen and make choices. And I think the next expo, if hopefully we have one, that's going to be the standard in 4 years. And there'll be no more touching things anymore.
Dora, did you have any thoughts on that as well? I just wondered.
I don't know if I mentioned that it's not clearly related to your question about COVID, but if you remember the Delta, the letter Delta was very negatively related to the Delta variation of COVID. So in our event, the logo, the capital Delta was there to give the opposite impression of the Greek Delta that was related to COVID. So I think we tried to use the communicative platform of the event and of Expo to reverse the impact of the pandemic and Delta variation to the language. Of course, Omicron is still there, and who knows, it will become Omega at some point. But you know, the thing is that, you know, these kind of events give the opportunity to change some stereotypes sometimes, or trigger some discussions, and this is interesting. This is interesting.
Thank you. I think that's probably it for the questions. I'm not sure that we'll have any more coming through. So maybe, Filaretti, I'll hand back over to you for closing.
Microphone.
You're muted. Still muted. There we go.
Yes, I always do that. And I was just saying that I always do that, and I was doing it again. Anyway, so I would like to thank you, Tara, for for your inputs in the session. And I would like to thank our speakers, Dr. Greg, Dr. Will, and Dora from Greece. I would also like to thank my students, my wonderful students, Latifa and Latifa, and also I didn't mention my other 3 students that are not here with us today, but they also participated for doing this little video, and they also worked at the Pavilion. Mariam, Meitha, and I forgot the name of the third one. Latifa, who was the third student? Afra, yes, and Afra Butti. So I would like to thank the other 3 students as well that contributed to this. I would like to thank Leontine for being behind the scenes and organizing this webinar and everything that was necessary to put it together. And yes, I think that is it from my side. I hope you enjoyed the seminar. Thank you for all the participants. I think we had from 20 different countries, as Leontine mentioned. So I think we just hope to have a soon coming another webinar related to the region as the coordinator of the Middle East. So hopefully we'll meet again on Zoom, and later maybe physically when when COVID Omega or Omicron or whoever it is, you know, goes away. But yeah, thank you everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Filaretti, for organizing a great event.
Thank you so much, and take care.